Hello friends, we'll be covering the chapter number 7 now. Now this chapter number 7 of integrative management is about, it's titled as a leap of the mind. It's got a lot of abstract things, some terminologies which I'll be talking about, some ways of thinking process, with examples of course, and this actually tells you how you have to take a leap from your mind. Leaping means I have a certain way of doing things. Now when I have a certain way of doing things, I get stuck up into that, what we call it as factory setting. So in this chapter we are talking about how you need to come out of that by taking a leap. Imagine there's a frog in a well or in a small receptacle. It's swimming, it's trying to come out. When it gets really desperate, what will it do? It will try to leap out. You know, we have the story of the frog, wherein a frog is kept in a vessel and there's a heat from bottom. I don't know why they have to heat the vessel, but then they say that when the vessel gets heated up, the water becomes warm, it becomes hotter and hotter, and then the frog jumps out. So what do people do? Only when the going gets very tough, they try to take a leap. Or do they take a leap willingly? No. They do things which are different from the ordinary when they're into real trouble. In fact, they actually do things which we are talking about, but they do it only when there's a crisis. Now, when we talk about leap of the mind, we are talking about the way the mind will start thinking in a direction which is very, very different, never thought of before. So, what are we going to be covering in this? Building something from nothing. One of the cases of a gentleman from South Africa, okay, a result of an integrative thinking, 3 tools to generate creative resolution, the 3 thinking processes. And then we'll be talking about the personal case and exercise to practice assertive inquiry. The structure is how integrative thinkers connect the dots. Building something from nothing. Generative reasoning, one of the tools, which is also called as abductive reasoning. Then we have the causal modeling, assertive inquiry, and the failure to communicate. We have gone through a journey of 6 chapters, and we started off by talking about what is integrative thinking by giving examples, cases of the various achievers. Then we came to chapter 2, we gave a framework, the 4 different steps of integrative thinking, starting from salience, causality, architecture, and resolution, right? Then we came to the thinking process, how we need to go by a certain step-by-step thinking process. I need to know what are my stands, and from the stands comes the tools of my thinking and action, and finally I come to the outcome. Stands, tools, and experiences. So those 2 are something which we mastered, which we talked about. Then we said about the 6 different thoughts, 6 different sentences, 6 different processes which I need to put to myself. 6 ways of looking at myself and the world around. 3 about me and 3 about the world. So those 3 different stages of integrative thinking we have gone through. First one is understanding the theory or the structure, 4 steps. Second, about how the mind thinks, about how you and I think, which is about stands, tools, and experiences. Third is understanding the 3 ways in which what I tell myself, 3 ways in which I relate with the world, and then reframing them or putting them in a different context altogether. And now, in this chapter, Leap of the Mind, what we are essentially covering is understanding the need for us to have different ways of thinking and action. There are some terminologies given here which may sound like a jargon, but I'll try and explain it to you as simple as possible so that all of us are understanding what we need to do. Right? So here we go. We start with the quote by Archimedes. Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which I to place it, and I shall move the world. Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world. In physics we have learnt about fulcrum and lever and resistance and all that stuff. So what are we doing basically? He says that give me a lever, give me a rod. I'm using my word rod. Give me a rod long enough. At the end of the rod, I have the whole world, the whole globe is put at the end of the rod. And what do I do? If the rod is long enough, What is a principle of leverage tells you? It tells you a small effort at that end of the rod can actually lift a large weight. We are taking, we are making use of something called a fulcrum, which is at the center, and here is a weight and here is a length. So this is physics or applied mechanics in action. So all I need to do is to give a slight pressure and the whole thing lifts. We all know it. We have been using it. The crowbar, right? A crowbar is an example where you have a lever in which you have to lift something, a stone or something. You just give a small effort and the thing goes up. And from there comes a terminology which we use in management, leveraging. In a leveraging, what are we doing? We are taking a small effort and it brings about a major change. So Archimedes says, give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it. The point of contact where the lever is centered. On one hand you have the resistance, the other side you have the effort, the load and the effort. So he says, give me a lever long enough lever and a fulcrum to place on it and I shall move the world. Meaning that he says that all you need is to have an important lever. We need to have we need to have something which we can effortlessly take care of. Indirectly this quote is telling us, give me some means by which I can think in such a way that I can effortlessly make things happen. Imagining a very long lever on which you keep the world on one side and just give a small effort here and the world starts lifting is unimaginable. That's exaggeration of the highest order. But essentially what it tries to tell us is that even the worst, even the weightiest problems, even the worst scenarios could be tackled provided you have a leverage, provided you have some tools, some ways of thinking which can actually help you to make things happen, right? So that being the introduction, we go down and talk about a particular case study, a real thing that has happened in South Africa. It's about a gentleman called Teddy Blecher. Teddy Blecher was an actuary. Actuary is a part of the insurance industry. Those of you are not aware. In the insurance industry, there are these very elite people called actuaries. I call them elite because they are the people who actually study on what basis the insurance premium has to be done, the basics of how to go about fixing the premium and the percentages and all that. It's a very, very deep science. It requires a very high level of skill and understanding. There are very few actuaries who graduate out every year globally. So once you belong to the elite club of actuarial, you have a name, actuarial club. Okay. Now, Teddy Blecher was an actuary, gold medal winner in 1990 and was a top actuarial science student. A small and a slight person wearing obligatory thick rimmed spectacles, rumpled clothes and running shoes. A person who was not very good looking or just one of those nerds, if you can call him. A person who was bookish, a spectacle which is maybe nondescript, wearing crumpled shirts and trousers, wearing some sort of a running shoes or a sport shoes, something which is nondescript, right? Now this gentleman, when you look at him ordinarily, what will you think? He can't do anything. He's a very stereotypical guy. He's something very different. You can't think about such a person to be a creative man, right? This is the normal way in which we look at these people, right? He was a person who co-founded a particular an institute called Community and Individual Development Agency, City Campus, in short CIDA, CIDA, an innovative South African university. Now what is this all about? Let's understand. Here is the person, Dr. Teddy Blecher, a South African actuary, management consultant and educational entrepreneur, co-founder of CIDA's City Campus, and was given the World Economic Forum's Global Leader for Tomorrow Award in 2002 and once again in 2005. That's him. And there are some quotes in the next two slides. He says, when people say you can't do it and all the reasons why, we set out to prove you can. In fact, you can take kids out of the gutter, you can take people out of the streets who have absolutely no opportunities, who come from broken homes, and you can help those people become the fabric of new society. He was referring to the black kids of South Africa who at one point of time due to the apartheid were suppressed community, the blacks, as all of us know. So this is post apartheid, when the country became liberal in terms of the racial color, the apartheid was over, and then suddenly we find that the black kids also had equal opportunities to study in the colleges, schools which the white kids were studying. But there was a dilemma. That's what we are discussing here, right? So the next quote is, these things sound so serious, they sound so impossible to solve. They're so solvable, and there are infinite numbers of ways that we can create wealth in sub-Saharan Africa. There are many jobs, there are so many jobs that can be filled. Sub-Saharan Africa is below the Sahara Desert. Whatever part of Africa is there, that's called as Sub-Saharan Africa. South Africa is down below there, so it falls under Sub-Saharan Africa. Now what was he referring to? He said that trying to do something for the black kids, who are huge in numbers, a good sizable population, who have been living in literally like gutters, condemned by the state because of their policies, who are not allowed to mix with people, who are not even seen as human beings. Now these people have suddenly been liberated. Imagine all of them being locked up in a jail, and they're just liberated. They're just going out. And when they see the world around, a well-intentioned person like Dr. Teddy Blecher would like to see that they become equal in real terms, of getting equal opportunities, of mixing with the other ethnic communities, the whites, so that they also get equal opportunities and they start raising themselves to a level of productivity for the nation. This was the thought. But then suddenly you've been locked up for years and years, for decades, for generations, and then you're coming out, you do not have the skills, you do not know how to do it, and you're still with the old behavior. Now this was the actual thing that happened as soon as the apartheid got ended in South Africa. Audiences gave this actually turned social entrepreneur their rapt attention when he speaks, and they feel a sense of loss when the words stop. He had a very good oratory skills, something very convincing, and a passion and an integrity of one pointedness, whatever he did. Like souls at a revival meeting. When we say revival meeting, means in the Western culture we have those spiritual meetings or religious congregations. Those are called the revival meetings, where people come, people who are looking for solace in life, people who feel brutalized, people are seeking for something, out of emptiness they want to come out and seek a meaning in life. So they go towards some of these revival meetings, where we have a evangelist, as you call him, who speaks about God, who speaks about all the good things in life. So like souls, like people who come at a revival meeting presenting themselves to be saved from disaster, listeners walk up to him after his talks to volunteer to work for the university popularly known as SIDA. So people were passionate. It's like they were willing to give them their entire self, just like a person coming to a revival meeting. That's the type of passion, that's the type of attention he was getting. Like as if he was a preacher, right? Because that's the type of work that he did. So maybe Blecher had a bit too much charisma to fit neatly into the actuarial stereotype. So we are just talking about how a person who belongs to the actuarial community is not usually that flashy, that attractive types of person. He's just somebody in the corner who's a brilliant person, but who's very recognized, who's a highly accomplished person. But this is not what Blecher was. So he seemed to be a misfit in the actual practice. That's just a side line. Okay. The end of the apartheid opened up new political opportunities for young African people, but they enjoyed little in the way of economic opportunities. They're very poor people. They were denied. They had not worked. They lived in what is called the ghettos, the slums, right? And unemployment among the blacks was over 40%, and only 6% of the population had a university education at all. Very pathetic condition. Okay. Now Blecher wanted to offer his young compatriots, the black compatriots, his fellow men, a chance at an education and a better life. Very noble thought, genuinely noble thought. And he had two obvious options for attacking the problem. Here's where we are getting into integrative thinking. Two ways of doing it he thought of. There were two options. So what was the first option? The first choice was traditional contact education was the first choice, but it was problematic because it had been scaled to white minority, which traditionally was the only segment eligible for the university education during the days of apartheid. One was, when we say contact education, means the person goes to the school or the college physically. There are classrooms, you sit there, you study, and this is the best form of learning. Now this was a privilege which was given only to the minority white community who were ruling the South Africans. and who had actually brought about the apartheid in a very, very strict manner. So it was a privilege only of those people. So that was one way of bringing the blacks to the classroom. One choice was there, bringing them to the classroom, right? That was the first choice. The second choice, the existing educational infrastructure, continuing with the first one, the existing educational infrastructure lacked the capacity to absorb the backlog of young blacks previously denied education. There were too many numbers, and these were more or like elite schools, the white schools. So absorbing them inside required a lot of thoughtfulness, not because they were blacks. The political system was no more discriminating people, but there were other issues. Could they afford it? They needed more facilities, more classrooms, more laboratories, more teachers. So these are some of the things that they could not absorb because it was too much of a thing that was coming up. And this was before considering the cost, $5,000 a year, beyond the reach of most black families, and more than what government could afford on desired scale. On one hand, the government gives you a subsidy, the government gives you something like a reduced fees so that somebody else absorbs it. So even if the blacks, who were huge in numbers, had to be accommodated in the white schools, which were having limited facilities, it was quite a tough challenge. This was the thing about the first choice, bringing the blacks to the contact programs, asking them to come to the classrooms or making them give education which is contact based, right? Now the second option of distance learning or distance education. If I can't go to the school, then I can do something from a distance education, DLP, distance learning program, as you guys are going through, right? Now DLP, distance learning, it works well in highly developed countries with well-established education and communication infrastructure. We have our own hybrid program, distance learning. It's possible because we are connected with the net. So many of you, hundreds and thousands of you, are able to capture the virtual class lectures. This very lecture which I'm talking about right now, you are able to go through because technology is supporting us. The communication systems are advanced. Now where does all this come from? This comes, what does this all require? This requires money. There's a lot of investment that has gone into it. And that's the investment in technology is a leverage to reach so many hundreds and thousands of students like you. So if distance learning is something which was a choice for the blacks, what were the things that they were facing? It was good for motivated and well-prepared students with strong networks and proper education foundation. Those of you listening to me, you come from good networks, good backgrounds, and your system, your education foundation is also pretty strong. It's good for you, and you guys can afford to be at a distance and learn distance learning for whatever constraints you have, right? Now these people, they did not have a strong network, neither did they have a proper education foundation. So even if I want to give them a distance education, it was still challenging. Imagine on one hand the dilemma, Blecher's dilemma. I want to really do something for this black community and bring them at par with the white community in South Africa. While I want to do this, there are two choices. Bring them to the classroom. Not possible because infrastructure is limited. Cost is very high and they can't afford it. And the state can't give a subsidy that much. On the other side, we have them opting for distance learning program. Now distance learning program again involves investments from this side. But the most important thing is that at that end, at the student end, they need to have the type of infrastructure and the basic education to absorb, to learn how to use the computer and get the virtual class or whatever to be absorbed. That they did not have. So in short, there was a completely deprived community who would have been a write-off for many people. But here was Teddy Blecher who said, nothing doing, I'm going to do something about it. When you have some inverted commas madness in your head about doing something innovative and creative, somehow you get the integrative thought coming to you. That's an experience 10 out of 10 cases. If there's something basically good you want to do for someone whom everybody has written off, all you need to do is to just intuitive, just get into it and say nothing doing, it can be done, and suddenly you'll find that something comes up. And that's exactly what happened to Blecher. Let's see what he did. So he said that African, and this is what African blacks lacked all these two things. One's really got to create some sort of a third model, Blecher declared. He automatically thought of a third model, integrative thinking. What did he do? Blecher set out to bring out the third model into being, using technology, ingenuity, and sheer improvisation alone, the improvising and also coming out with a lot of enthusiasm to provide to young blacks the support, coaching and the discipline that contact education had traditionally given young South African whites. Technology on one side, which is about distance learning, and the other thing is about the contact program in which they come to the physically to the class. Combination of these two, right? And in that, his first order of business was to attack. First thing, what should I do first? He said, let me attack. Attack means not hit. Attack the educational cost structure. Look at the cost structure and then see what I can do to improve upon it, to make it much more cheaper, affordable for the blacks. Blecher, with his profoundly optimistic stance, didn't view his lack of financial resources as a serious impediment. Yes, a lot of money was required, but he did not take it. He said, it's okay, we'll do something about it. He was not trivializing it. You know what is trivializing? It means I know there's a problem and yet I don't want to accept it as a problem. That's a different mindset. This mindset is, I know the enormity of the problem and I am willing to wade through the complexity, the earlier chapter. I know it's very chaotic for the ordinary people. For me, it is complex and I am willing to wade through it. I'm comfortable with the fact that in spite of this being non-achievable by many people, something tells me that there is a model which I can create and I can make it happen. It's coming from an optimistic background, optimistic paradigm, not one wherein a person is switched off from reality. The reality to me, I know there is a constraint. I know that the amount of money required is very high, but then that is not a major issue. I will find some way, it will happen. It's not foolish guts, it's something on which the person believes can take place. Some sort of a reasoning system which he has in him, right? So, taking it further, friends, it's not that we need more financial resources. He told himself, we just need to think differently. Many of you who are running your own business, many of you who are into financial related jobs or even running your own homes, when there's a huge financial thing coming up in front of you, you're going to simply stop and think differently. Whether you're buying an apartment, whether you're buying a very expensive appliance like a plasma TV or a car or something, then you're going to just ask yourself a question. You can't afford it, then you ask yourself a question, can I think differently? People get stuck up in the content rather than in the process of thinking. Content of thinking is, I want to buy a car, so I start thinking in terms of car all the time. I don't think about how I think about the car. The how I think about the car is more important than the car itself. Let's say that I've got about 20 lakhs with me and I desire to buy a car. So I would love to buy a high-end car, let's say something which I love is costing 35 lakhs, right? Now I might say that okay, 35 lakhs, so the car is the focus. So I might shift my focus from a 35 lakh car to maybe a 25 lakh car. I may draw a 5 lakh loan, or I may come down to a car which is 20 lakhs or less than 20 lakhs. Where is my focus? It's about shifting the car from 35 lakhs to less than 20 lakhs. Content. Instead, I stop and ask myself a question. I desire to have that car which is 35 lakhs. How much am I having? 20 lakhs. So where is my thinking? What is the stance I am taking? What sort of tools I am employing to think in that direction of going for the 35 lakh car, although I have only 20 lakhs. And then the experience. What is it that I'll be experiencing when I buy that car? What are the various things I'll be going through? All those things I need to map. So what am I doing right now is I'm thinking about how my thinking has happened, wherein I am desiring the 35 lakh car, whereas I have only 20 lakhs with me. Now when I do this thinking about my thinking, I start realizing that I am still able to make that 35 lakh car by a different approach. Now what is a different approach? Each one of us can have different approaches. In many instances I have seen, many people have done this. Although they do not call it integrative thinking, they have employed it. Whenever you're faced with a major dilemma, stop, pause and think of the process of thinking, underlying process, rather than the content of what you're thinking. Because many a time the barrier is not in the content. It's not the pricing of the 35 lakh car. It's about how I am thinking about the 35 lakh car with respect to my 20 lakh budget. Okay. So the campus building, coming back to this, the campus building of CEDA itself, the former downtown Johannesburg headquarters of a bank called Investec Bank, typifies Blecher's something from nothing approach. There was this bank called Investec Bank. The next slide, I'll explain this to you. It was donated to CEDA. Why it was donated? It was located in a region, in an area in that part of Johannesburg where there was a lot of racial riots. People got so fed up of that place, they said, we just don't want this place, let's abandon it, go away. And then, reading it from the slide, it was donated to CEDA because its owner deemed worthless after most tenants fled the violence and the urban decay of the downtown Johannesburg, the suburbs. The CEDA model works on the fact that students themselves running and maintaining the school facilities, they help keep the cost low. What is the model which Blecher thought about? We'll have the students in a place like this which has come at a low cost or no cost. Make the basics happen. Let the students come here, and to run the place, normally we need to have support staff, we need to have others coming in. Except for the essentials like a teacher, the other support things of keeping the classroom clean, keeping the blackboards clean, seeing that the gangways are all clean. You don't have to have a janitor. We have a janitor abroad, or somebody like for a housekeeping. So we don't have to have a janitor. So we will make the students do the job. They can't afford to pay. So to keep the thing clean, let the students themselves keep it clean. And the students who are staying there in the university, they can actually help in the cooking, the cleaning, and various other boarding lodging activities. So in short, students who are studying there run the institute, run the university, a model which is unthought of, right? Now he said that since they can't afford it, we'll give them the same type of education, but we'll make them make up for the cost which we can't afford by employing people from outside, but they can't afford. So thereby what he did was he was able to give them education which was affordable, at the same time not lacking in quality, right? So they are in class 8 to 9 hours a day, and in addition they cook, clean and do the university's maintenance and paperwork. In the process, learn skills they can apply in their careers. Such actions in collective frugality had brought the cost down to about $1,000 per student a year. Compare this with $5,000 which we spoke about some time back. So it became very affordable, right? And now, even if resources are scarce, the most severe shortages could be overcome by Blecher's boundless ability to make something out of nothing. We can all practice this. Just take a situation in your life where you feel that this is not just possible, a situation which is overpoweringly impossible. Sit down, and whatever we are going to be explaining in this particular chapter, apply that type of reasoning process, and then you will find that everything is based on your reasoning and your thinking process, not on the content of what you're doing. And then you will find that it's possible to take that and maybe more. Okay? So on CEDA's opening in 1999, Blecher still hadn't received the computers a donor had promised. They had ordered for some computers, it did not still come. But the CEDA had already got its classrooms open. No matter, he handed each student a photocopy of the keyboard, and they used the photocopies for typing lessons. So maybe they had one computer somewhere as a master, and these people had a photocopy of the keyboard and maybe the other parts of the computer, so that even before the hardware physically came to the institute, they were familiar with what it is all about. For a community which has never seen computers, which has never seen a classroom, which has never gone to a school. So he took charge of the situation. Even if the computers were not there, he did not wait for the computers to come. He said, let's do something about it. He had probably made some printouts, and he gave the printouts to these students and started teaching them through the various parts of the computer which they got familiar with, right?